He hit the snow hard, a full-grown canine, trained to save lives, shaking, abandoned, bleeding. No sirens, no apology, just a truck disappearing into the winter road. They said, he failed the program. The dog didn't bark, he didn't run, he just stayed where they left him. Months earlier, this same canine had worked disaster zones, pulled strangers from death. Now he lay outside a closed station, cold burning into his bones. Then a man stopped, 68 years old, a worn military jacket, hands that had carried too many losses. He looked at the dog and said, "I won't leave you." That should have been the end of it. But it wasn't. What followed wasn't about training, or orders, or uniforms. It was about memory, and loyalty that refused to die. Before we begin, remember to like, share, and subscribe. Where are you watching from today? And tell me honestly, what are you feeling right now? Snow fell without wind. Not drifting, not swirling, just descending straight down as if the sky itself had gone quiet. The mountain road leading into the northern town disappeared layer by layer, its edges softened until direction felt optional, even memory uncertain. Streetlights flickered on one by one, casting pale cones of yellow that barely warmed the gray pressing in from every side. Nothing moved quickly here, not cars, not people, not time. Outside the old police station, long since shuttered and stripped of purpose, a German shepherd lay curled against a chain-link fence. His body was tight, drawn inward, conserving what little heat remained. Black and gray fur was matted with dried mud and salt, stiff along the spine, thinner at the ribs. One front leg lay at an awkward angle, favoring the other whenever he shifted, which he tried not to do. The training collar around his neck had been cut clean through, the severed strap hanging loose like something torn away in a hurry or a decision made without looking back. He did not whine, he did not bark, he breathed. Each breath came shallow and controlled, fogging the air just long enough to prove he was still there. His amber eyes stayed open, tracking movement without following it, watching boots pass on the sidewalk, headlights glide by, shadows stretch and vanish. People noticed him. Some slowed. A few glanced twice. One woman hesitated, fingers tightening around her coat. But no one stopped. No one crossed the short distance between themselves and the dog pressed into the snow. The explanation had already been given. It had traveled faster than the storm, faster than compassion. He didn't meet standards. Too slow on response. Wouldn't engage on command. Too emotional. The words sounded clean when spoken indoors. Practical, necessary. Outside, they froze in the air and fell uselessly to the ground. Shadow, though no one called him that anymore, had learned the sound of dismissal before. He recognized it in the way voices dropped at the end of sentences, in the way eyes slid past him now, as if he had already been reduced to something easier to step around than face. Night deepened. The temperature dropped fast, the kind of cold that tightened joints and made metal sing faintly as it contracted. Snow gathered in the folds of his fur, melting, then refreezing. Shadow adjusted his weight once, just enough to relieve the ache in his leg, and stilled again. His ears flicked at a distant sound, a door slamming somewhere down the street, a truck shifting gears, but his head did not lift. He had learned not to waste energy on what would not return. This place had once been familiar. Not the town, not the road, but the rhythm of duty that used to pass through it. Sirens, radios, boots moving with intention. He remembered light cutting through darkness, remembered being sent forward into it. His body still knew the shapes of commands, the geometry of movement, even if no one asked for them now. Muscles tightened on instinct, then loosened when nothing followed. The absence of orders weighed heavier than any correction ever had. Another car slowed. A man leaned out the window, stared for a moment too long, then shook his head and drove on. Shadow watched until the red lights vanished into snowfall. His eyes did not follow the car so much as the idea of it, the leaving. He lowered his chin back onto his paws, breath steadying. He was not waiting for rescue. He was waiting because that was what he had been trained to do when things went quiet. Snow kept falling. The fence at his back held the cold, its metal pressing through fur and skin. Shadow did not pull away. The fence was something solid, something that stayed. He closed his eyes for a moment, not sleeping, just resting them, and when he opened them again, the street looked the same. Gray, empty, unconcerned. Somewhere down the block, a voice cut through the stillness. "Hey, move it." A sharp command, emergency short, familiar. Shadow's head lifted an inch. His ears came forward despite himself, a reflex too old to unlearn. But the voice wasn't for him. It never was anymore. He let his head sink back down, disappointment passing through his body like a cold wave, then settling into the bones. Hours passed that way. Maybe more. Time flattened. Snow piled against his flank, softening his outline until he looked less like a dog and more like part of the ground itself. His breathing slowed further, careful not to draw too much cold inside. The pain in his leg dulled into something distant and manageable. He had endured worse. He had endured being useful. The last light in the station building flickered once behind boarded windows and went dark. Shadow was alone now in the truest sense of the word. No one inside, no one responsible, no one watching except the storm. Still, he did not leave. His eyes stayed open, fixed on the road as it curved up and out of town, disappearing into the mountains. Somewhere beyond that bend, he sensed movement, not sound, not smell, just the faint disturbance of expectation. He had felt it before, in moments before deployment, when the air shifted and something unspoken prepared to arrive. The snow thinned briefly, just enough to reveal a figure at the far end of the road, not a patrol, not a uniform. An older man moved slowly along the shoulder, boots careful on ice, posture slightly stooped but deliberate. He wore a field jacket, olive green, worn at the elbows, the fabric heavy with history. No insignia that caught the light, no radio. One hand held a walking cane, its tip sinking into the snow with each step. The other hung loose at his side, gloved, steady. He had not yet seen the dog. Shadow watched him approach, every sense sharpening despite exhaustion. The man's pace slowed as he drew closer to the station, his gaze lifting, scanning the fence line. When his eyes finally met Shadow's, the world seemed to pause between steps. The man stopped. He did not speak. He did not move closer. He just stood there, breath visible in the cold, looking at the shape pressed against the fence. Snow settled on the brim of his cap, on his shoulders, on the edge of the cane. He did not brush it away. His eyes held something Shadow recognized immediately, something that had nothing to do with pity. Recognition. Shadow did not lift his head. He did not whine. He waited. The distance between them remained unchanged, but something in the air had shifted. The snow continued to fall, silent as before, but it no longer felt empty. At the edge of the road, the old man took one slow step forward, then stopped again, as if understanding that whatever came next could not be rushed. The night held its breath. The snow kept falling, softer now, thicker, muffling the world until even distance felt padded. The old man remained where he was, boots planted just off the road, breath steady, the faint creak of his cane the only sound breaking the stillness. He did not step closer. He did not speak. The silence between him and the dog stretched, not empty, but watchful, as if both were listening for something neither could name. Jonas Hale stood with the patience of someone who had learned long ago that sudden movements invite the wrong kind of attention. The jacket on his shoulders had once been stiff with purpose. Now it hung looser, the fabric worn thin at the seams, the military patch faded almost to gray. At 68, he carried himself carefully, not from weakness but from habit, the kind built by years of measuring risk in inches and seconds. His eyes, pale and steady, stayed on the dog without pressing, without demanding anything back. Shadow shifted. The movement was small, controlled, the effort visible in the way his weight transferred unevenly. He rose to his feet without sound, muscles tight beneath matted fur, head level, eyes locked on Jonas. He did not bark. He did not retreat. He held his ground the way creatures do when retreat is proven useless and advance too costly. The distance between them remained unchanged, but the tension sharpened, brittle as ice. Jonas noticed the leg immediately, the slight hitch in the stance, the way the dog favored one side while pretending not to. He had seen that kind of stubbornness before, dressed in human skin, hidden behind clenched jaws and silence. Still, he did nothing. His hand moved slowly to his other glove, fingers tugging it free. The leather slid off with a soft scrape, dropped into the snow between them, palm open, empty. No command followed, no reach, no sound. The glove lay there, dark against white, an offering without instruction. Jonas stepped back half a pace, just enough to make space, just enough to show he understood what distance meant to those who had learned it the hard way. Shadow watched the glove, then the man, then the space beyond him, calculating, measuring the cost of each choice. His breath fogged once, twice, then steadied. Minutes passed like that. Snow collected on Jonas's shoulders, on the brim of his cap, on the handle of his cane. He did not brush it away. The cold pressed into his joints, sharp and familiar, but he stayed still. He had stood longer in worse places. Waiting, he had learned, was sometimes the only action that mattered. Shadow did not move closer, but he did not turn away. Something in the air eased just slightly. The hard edge of the moment softened, replaced by something quieter, more dangerous in its vulnerability. Jonas felt it too, the subtle shift, like a held breath finally released. He lowered himself carefully, resting one knee against the packed snow, keeping his hands visible, empty. The dog's ears flicked at the sound of movement, but his stance held. A truck passed on the road behind Jonas, tires hissing through slush. The noise cut sharp, sudden. Shadow flinched, muscles coiling, eyes flashing toward the sound, then back to Jonas. The man did not turn. He stayed exactly as he was, gaze steady, body calm, absorbing the moment without reacting to it. When the truck was gone, the quiet returned, thicker than before. Jonas rose again, slower this time, and took a single step back, not away from the dog, but toward the path that led up into the mountains. He did not look over his shoulder as he turned. He did not check if the dog followed. He simply began to walk, boots crunching softly, cane marking a steady rhythm in the snow. He had gone maybe 10 steps when he heard it. Not pause on snow, not movement, breathing. Jonas did not stop. He kept his pace the same, unhurried, as if the world behind him no longer required his supervision. The sound followed, faint at first, then steadier, a presence rather than a pursuit. When he reached the bend where the road narrowed and the trees closed in, he paused, just long enough to look back. Shadow stood several yards behind him, posture low, careful, eyes fixed on Jonas's back. The distance between them was deliberate, measured, close enough to stay, far enough to run. Jonas gave a single nod more to himself than to the dog and continued on. The town fell away quickly, lights swallowed by trees, the road turning from plowed gray to untouched white. The cabin came into view through the snowfall, small and dark against the forest, smoke rising thin from the chimney. Inside, the air held the scent of old wood and ash. Jonas set his cane by the door, shrugged off his jacket, and stoked the fire until flames caught, casting orange light across the rough-hewn walls. He moved with practiced economy, each action deliberate, unhurried. He poured water into a kettle, set it near the heat, then sat back to the hearth, eyes on the door. Shadow did not enter right away. He stood in the doorway, snow clinging to his fur, the warmth spilling out toward him in waves. His ears stayed high, alert, every muscle ready to spring. The fire crackled, a sudden pop sending a spark upward. Shadow flinched again, just barely, then stilled, eyes flicking to Jonas. It's all right, Jonas said softly, the words barely louder than the fire. A human-to-dog line, offered without expectation. Shadow took one step inside. The floor creaked under his weight, old boards protesting softly. He froze, head low, breath shallow, waiting for something to happen. Nothing did. Jonas didn't move. He didn't look away either. He stayed exactly where he was, hands resting on his knees, the firelight painting his face in warm shadows. Shadow advanced another step, then another, stopping well short of the fire. He lowered himself carefully, favoring the injured leg, body coiled tight, eyes never leaving Jonas. Snow melted beneath him, darkening the wood. The room settled around them, the sound of wind outside fading beneath the steady crackle of flame. Jonas reached out then, not toward the dog, but toward a folded blanket beside him. He slid it across the floor with his boot, slow and quiet, letting it come to rest within Shadow's reach. No words followed, no encouragement. The gesture was enough. Shadow watched the blanket, then Jonas, then the fire. After a long moment, he shifted forward, dragging the blanket closer with his nose, then settling onto it, muscles loosening by degrees. His eyes half closed, then snapped open again at a shift in the logs. The rhythm of vigilance remained, but something underneath it had changed. Jonas noticed the way the dog's ears reacted to his movements, not the sound of them, but the shape. When Jonas lifted his hand to adjust the kettle, Shadow's head lifted, eyes tracking the motion precisely, body responding before thought. Jonas paused. Hand midair. He lowered it slowly, palm open, fingers flat. Shadow lay still. Jonas tried again, this time raising his hand just enough to catch the firelight. Fingers spread, palm facing down. Shadow's body tensed, then stilled, then, almost imperceptibly, his chest touched the blanket, posture lowering in a controlled descent that had nothing to do with fear. Jonas's breath caught. He masked it quickly, turning his attention back to the fire, but the realization stayed sharp and undeniable. This wasn't instinct alone. This was memory, training, a language learned deeply enough to survive abandonment. The fire popped again. Shadow flinched less this time. Jonas leaned back against the wall, eyes on the flames, letting the moment pass without pressing into it. Outside, the snow continued to fall, steady and silent. Inside, two figures shared the same warmth without crossing the space between them. In the flickering light, Jonas lifted his hand once more, slow, deliberate, a gesture from another life. Shadow responded. Morning arrived without announcement. No sun broke through the clouds, only a thinning of darkness, the firelight surrendering its dominance to a pale gray that slipped quietly through the cabin windows. The world outside remained frozen, the forest holding its breath. Inside, the cabin smelled of ash and old pine, warmth lingering low to the floor where the fire had burned through the night. The sound came suddenly. Metal striking wood, sharp, clean, final. Shadow exploded into motion before thought could catch up. His body snapped rigid, muscles locking as if pulled tight by invisible wire. Breath hitched in his chest, fast and shallow, each inhale scraping the air. His ears flattened, tail stiff, eyes wide and unblinking, fixed on the place where the sound had landed. For a split second, the cabin vanished, replaced by something older, louder, and far less forgiving. Jonas did not move. He let the kettle lie where it had fallen, steam curling upward in a thin, trembling ribbon. Slowly, deliberately, he lowered himself to the floor, back against the wall, hands resting open on his thighs. No reach, no correction, just presence. The fire crackled softly behind him, steady and indifferent, a sound that did not demand response. Shadow's gaze flicked to Jonas. That look. Jonas felt it settle in his chest with a familiar weight. He had seen it before, etched into young faces under harsh lights, eyes too old for their years, holding the quiet terror of those who no longer believed survival was guaranteed. It wasn't fear of pain. It was fear of permission to breathe, to stand down, to exist without consequence. Jonas stayed still. Time stretched thin. The kettle stopped steaming. The cabin returned to itself. Shadow's breathing slowed by degrees, though his body remained coiled tight, ready. His eyes never left Jonas's face, searching for something, testing the air between them for threat or release. Jonas lifted his hand. The movement was slow enough to be almost invisible, fingers rising no higher than his knee, palm angled downward, not sharp, not commanding. It wasn't a signal meant to be seen. It was a memory, offered without expectation. A shape pulled from another life, when gestures mattered more than words and silence kept people alive. Shadow's body responded before his mind did. The tension bled out of him in a controlled descent, chest lowering to the floor, limbs folding beneath him with mechanical precision, softened by something else entirely. He did not lie down because he was told to. He lay down because he remembered. The movement carried weight, not obedience, but recognition, as if a door long sealed had cracked open just enough to let the past breathe. Jonas exhaled quietly. He did not look away, but he did not hold the moment either. He let it pass through the room like heat from the fire, warming and gone all at once. Shadow remained where he was, muscles still taut, but no longer locked. His eyes softened, the hard edge blunted by something fragile and unexpected. The rest of the morning moved gently around them. Jonas righted the kettle, poured water down the sink, the metal clink muted this time. Shadow flinched less, barely noticeable, his body correcting itself without spiraling. He tracked Jonas's movements, not with suspicion, but with focus, as if relearning the rules of a world that no longer shouted. Later, the knock came at the door. 3 soft raps, patient, unassuming. Jonas opened it to find a woman standing on the porch, bundled in a long wool coat, gray hair tucked neatly beneath a knit cap. Her posture was upright but relaxed, the kind of stance that came from years of standing beside others in moments that mattered. Her eyes were sharp, observant, missing nothing while pretending not to stare. Evelyn Carter did not step inside right away. She glanced past Jonas, into the cabin, her gaze settling on the dog lying near the hearth. Shadow lifted his head, ears angling toward her, body still but alert. The woman's expression shifted, something like recognition flickering across her face, followed by restraint. She had learned long ago the value of waiting. "I heard you had company," she said softly, her voice warm but measured. Jonas stepped aside, holding the door open. Evelyn entered slowly, careful with her footing, the scent of cold and wool following her inside. She removed her gloves, tucking them into her coat pocket, and let her eyes move between man and dog without comment. There were questions there, unspoken, held back by experience. Shadow watched her closely. Evelyn noticed the way he held himself, the alignment of his spine, the readiness coiled beneath stillness. She had seen it before, in dogs returned with folded flags and unanswered letters, in animals that had done their job and been left with the cost. She did not approach him, she did not crouch or call or coax. She simply acknowledged his presence with a nod, as one professional to another. "There are creatures," she said quietly, the words drifting into the space between them, "who don't fail." Jonas did not respond. He knew better than to interrupt a truth finding its way out. "They just get tired," Evelyn continued, her gaze resting on Shadow's injured leg, the cut collar. "And sometimes no one is willing to wait long enough for them to heal." Shadow's ears twitched at the sound of her voice, not in alarm, but curiosity. He shifted slightly, adjusting his weight, eyes never leaving her. Evelyn met his gaze without challenge, her face open, unguarded. She had stood at too many kennels, watched too many ceremonies without bodies, to mistake what she saw now. Jonas poured coffee, the rich, bitter smell filling the room, grounding it. He offered a cup to Evelyn, who accepted with a small nod, wrapping her hands around it as if the warmth carried more than heat. The fire popped again, louder this time. Shadow startled, just enough to tense, then settled, his breath evening out on its own. That Evelyn noticed too. She did not stay long. She never did. People like her learned the weight of presence, when to arrive and when to leave. Before stepping back into the cold, she paused at the door, looking once more at Shadow, then at Jonas. "He remembers," she said simply. Jonas nodded. He didn't ask what she meant. He didn't need to. The door closed behind her, the cabin returning to quiet. Outside, the day wore on, snow falling steady and unbroken. Inside, Shadow slept lightly, one eye open, breath slow. Jonas sat nearby, hands resting on his knees, watching the fire and thinking of all the things memory could do when given room. The sound of an engine cut through the afternoon. Low at first, distant, then closer. Shadow's head lifted, ears forward, body tensing not in fear, but awareness. Jonas rose, moving to the window. Through the falling snow, a vehicle rolled to a stop on the road below the cabin. Dark, government issued. On the door, half obscured by ice and motion, a symbol caught the light. Search and rescue. Jonas did not turn around. Shadow was already watching. The men arrived just after midday, their truck easing to a stop beneath the tall pines where the snow lay thinner, pressed down by old needles and shadow. Their jackets were technical, layered, marked with seams and zippers designed for weather and work, not sentiment. They moved with efficiency, boots crunching softly, eyes already cataloging the terrain before settling on the cabin. The forest seemed to tighten around them, branches creaking faintly as if listening. Shadow felt them before he saw them. He rose from the porch in one smooth motion, body aligning with the space between the cabin and the trees. His stance was firm, balanced despite the injured leg, chest forward, head level. He did not bare his teeth, He did not growl. He simply placed himself there, a living boundary drawn without aggression. Jonas stepped out behind him, stopping short when he saw the shift in Shadow's posture. The men slowed. They took in the dog first, noting the coat pattern, the muscle tone beneath worn fur, the way his eyes tracked movement without flicker. One of them nodded, almost involuntarily. Another adjusted his gloves, gaze narrowing, something like recognition crossing his face before being tucked away. They spoke quietly among themselves, words clipped, professional. "That's him," one said. Shadow did not move. The men explained what they already knew Jonas suspected. Shadow had been selected once, chosen from dozens for a specialized program that demanded more than speed or force. He had shown promise in conditions that broke others, navigated chaos with focus, refused to disengage when lives were still unaccounted for. And then, just as quietly, he had been removed. Psychologically unsuitable, one of the men said, the phrase practiced, distant. Didn't fit mission parameters. The words landed and stayed there, hanging between them like frost. Evelyn, who had come up behind Jonas without sound, turned away. She did not argue. She did not ask for clarification. Her shoulders stiffened just enough to betray the weight of memory, of standing in rooms where similar phrases had been used to simplify loss. Jonas said nothing either. He had learned long ago that some explanations were designed to end conversations, not begin them. Shadow remained still, eyes flicking once to Jonas, then back to the men. He did not challenge them. He did not retreat. His presence was neither threat nor plea. It was simply a fact. The men took a step back, reassessing. One of them crouched slightly, lowering his profile without reaching out, testing the dog's response. Shadow's ears twitched, body tensing, but he held his ground. The air felt tight now, stretched thin by unspoken histories. Jonas sensed it too, the way moments like this could tip without warning. "Easy," one of the men murmured, an emergency soft tone meant to steady the space rather than control it. Shadow did not respond to the word. He responded to the pause that followed it. Eventually, the men retreated to their truck, leaving behind a silence heavier than before. Snow drifted down from the branches overhead, dusting the place where they had stood. Evelyn watched the vehicle disappear down the road, her expression unreadable. She knew how these visits ended more often than not, and the knowledge sat quietly behind her eyes. That night, the forest changed. The sound came from far off at first, a sharp crack that fractured the stillness, echoing through the trees before fading. Then another, and another. Hunting shots, distant but unmistakable, rolling through the mountains like thunder without rain. The fire inside the cabin flared, shadows jumping across the walls. Shadow reacted instantly. His body jolted, muscles seizing as if pulled by an unseen force. His breath spiked, rapid and shallow, eyes wild as they searched for an exit. Before Jonas could speak, Shadow bolted, claws scrabbling against the wood floor, then the porch, then snow, vanishing into the dark between the trees. "Shadow," Jonas called once, his voice low, steady. The forest swallowed the sound. Jonas did not run. He stood in the doorway, listening as the echoes of gunfire faded, replaced by the whisper of falling snow and the creak of branches shifting under their load. Evelyn appeared beside him, her face pale in the firelight, worry etched deep but controlled. Jonas stepped past her, pulling on his jacket, then moved toward the tree line with deliberate slowness. Inside the forest, the cold sharpened. Snow reached his calves, each step measured, the cane marking his pace. He did not follow tracks. He did not call out again. He moved only far enough to leave the safety of the cabin, then stopped, choosing a small clearing where the trees opened just enough to let the sky press close. Jonas lowered himself into the snow. The cold bit immediately, seeping through fabric, into joints and bone. He welcomed it. It anchored him. He sat there, back straight, hands resting on his knees, breath fogging the air in slow, controlled bursts. The forest loomed around him, dark and watchful, alive with unseen movement. He did not call Shadow's name. He did not plead. He simply stayed. Time lost its shape. The cold deepened, numbing his legs, then his feet. Jonas focused on breathing, on remaining present, the way he had in other dark places where panic offered nothing useful. Somewhere deeper in the woods something moved, a shadow among shadows, too quiet to follow, too frightened to approach. Another shot echoed farther away this time. Jonas did not flinch. Snow settled on his shoulders, on his hat, on the thin line of his breath. His fingers stiffened, but he kept them relaxed, open. He knew this kind of waiting, the kind that demanded nothing and promised less. It was the only language some wounds understood. At last, movement broke the stillness. A shape emerged between the trees, slow, cautious, stopping often to listen. Shadow's outline took form, fur dusted white, body lower to the ground than before. He approached in increments, advancing a few steps, then freezing, ears pivoting, eyes locked on Jonas as if expecting him to vanish. Jonas remained seated. Shadow closed the distance one careful step at a time, each movement a negotiation between fear and memory. When he reached Jonas, he stopped, breath trembling, then leaned forward and rested his head against the man's knee. The contact was brief, tentative, but unmistakably intentional. Jonas lowered one hand, letting it hover just above Shadow's neck, not touching. Not yet. "It's all right," he whispered, barely louder than the snow. A human to canine line offered at the edge of something fragile. Shadow exhaled, long and shuddering. He stayed. Evelyn watched from the edge of the trees, having followed far enough to see but not interrupt. She stood with her hands clasped tight inside her coat, breath caught in her throat. She had seen reunions before, moments of trust reclaimed, but this one carried a different weight. She understood, in that quiet way born of loss, that this bond would not be simple. It would not be permanent. As Jonas and Shadow made their slow way back toward the cabin, Evelyn remained where she was, the snow gathering around her boots. She knew moments like this did not end with keeping. They ended with choosing. And some choices once made could never be undone. The search and rescue team returned just before dawn, their headlights cutting clean lines through the snowfall as the truck rolled to a stop at the edge of the clearing. The engine idled low, steady, the sound carrying farther than it should have in the thin mountain air. Pine branches stirred above them, shedding clumps of snow that fell and broke apart on the ground, soft and final. Morning was coming, but it had not yet decided to be kind. Shadow stood beside Jonas on the porch, his posture different now. Still alert, still ready, but no longer guarding. His weight was balanced evenly, the injured leg holding better than before, his breath calm despite the unfamiliar presence. He watched the men approach without tension, eyes tracking movement with the quiet confidence of something that had already faced worse and survived. The men spoke carefully this time. They didn't reach for leashes or equipment. They didn't assess him like a problem to be solved. Their voices stayed low, measured, respectful of the space between man and dog. They explained that Shadow had been observed, quietly, from a distance, that his reactions in the forest had confirmed what paperwork once denied. He had not broken, he had chosen. "We're not here to take him," one of them said after a pause long enough to matter. "We're here to ask." Jonas listened without nodding, without folding into himself. He had learned that some requests carried more weight than orders ever could. Shadow shifted closer, his shoulder brushing Jonas's leg, not seeking protection, just contact. Jonas felt the warmth through his coat and steadied his breathing around it. Evelyn stood a few steps back, hands clasped in front of her, eyes moving between the men and the dog. She did not interrupt. She never did when choices were being made. Instead, she waited for the moment that would belong only to Jonas, the moment where words would fail and something quieter would have to speak. It came when the men stepped away, giving space without being asked. Jonas reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and unfolded the paper Evelyn had given him the night before. The edges were worn soft, creased from being carried and unfolded more times than it deserved. There was only one line written on it, the ink slightly faded but steady, as if the hand that wrote it had known exactly what mattered. "Don't hold what you love just because you're afraid of being alone." Jonas read it once, then again. The forest was quiet around him, the kind of quiet that pressed in on the chest if you let it. He thought of mornings when the cabin had felt too big, nights when silence had stretched until it ached. He thought of the weight beside him now, living, breathing, choosing him back each time he stayed. The temptation to keep that was strong, stronger than any fear he'd faced in uniform. Shadow lifted his head, eyes meeting Jonas's. They held there, neither moving, neither looking away. Jonas lowered himself slowly, joints protesting softly until he was level with Shadow's gaze. He did not speak. He did not explain. He simply leaned forward until their foreheads touched, fur brushing skin, breath mingling in the cold. For a moment, the world narrowed to that single point of contact. No tears fell. Jonas did not let them. This was not grief yet. It was something steadier, something earned. He rested there, eyes closed, imprinting the feel of Shadow's presence the way you memorize a place you know you won't return to. When he pulled back, it was just enough to look once more into those amber eyes. "You know," he whispered, the words barely sound. A human to K9 line offered at the edge of release. Shadow stayed still. When Jonas stood, he did not reach for Shadow again. He stepped aside, clearing the space between the porch and the men waiting below. The choice had been made not with words, but with movement. Shadow looked from Jonas to the path ahead, then back once more, ears flicking as if listening for a command that did not come. The men waited. Shadow took one step forward, then another. His pace was unhurried, deliberate, each movement grounded. Halfway down the path, he stopped and turned, eyes locking onto Jonas's face. Jonas did not wave. He did not smile. He stood with his hands at his sides, spine straight, accepting the weight of the moment without bending under it. Shadow continued on. Evelyn watched him go, her chest tightening in that familiar way that came when something beautiful was also final. She had seen departures framed as victories before, and she knew how rarely they felt like it in the moment. When the truck door closed and the engine shifted, she placed a hand on Jonas's arm, brief and steady. "You did right," she said softly. Jonas nodded once. He could not trust his voice yet. The truck pulled away, tires carving lines into the snow that would soon be filled again. The sound faded, swallowed by the forest, leaving behind a silence that felt different than before. Not empty, just open. Days passed. The cabin settled into a new rhythm, one Jonas hadn't known he'd need to learn again. He still rose early, still stoked the fire, still stepped outside to breathe in the cold air before the day found him. But there was no weight beside him now, no familiar presence tracking his movements. The space Shadow had occupied remained warm for a while, then cooled, then became simply space. Evelyn visited less often, understanding without being told. When she did come, they spoke of small things, the weather, the road conditions, the way winter seemed longer each year. Neither mentioned the dog. Some names carried too much when spoken aloud. Weeks stretched into months. No messages came, no updates filtered back through unofficial channels, no photographs found their way to the cabin door. Jonas told himself this was good, that silence meant work was being done, lives were being saved somewhere beyond the mountains. Still, there were nights when the quiet pressed in harder than before, when the absence felt louder than any gunshot. He learned to live with it. On certain mornings, Jonas found himself pausing at the edge of the porch, eyes drawn to the tree line, half expecting a familiar shape to emerge. When it didn't, he adjusted his jacket and went about his day. Letting go, he realized, was not a single act. It was a practice, repeated until it hurt less. The forest moved through seasons, snow giving way to thaw, then mud, then green. Jonas marked time not by calendars, but by what changed around him. What did not change was the sense that somewhere, something he loved was moving through the world, doing what it had always been meant to do. No letters came, no calls, no sign. Just the quiet knowledge that choosing to let go had not meant losing everything, only changing the shape of what remained. The final evaluation unfolded on an open field where winter had never learned to soften its edges. Snow stretched unbroken in every direction, a clean white silence shaped by wind and patience, the kind of place where nothing hid and everything mattered. The sky hung low and pale, light diffused through cloud like breath held too long. Footprints marked the perimeter, precise and intentional, then stopped, leaving the center untouched. Shadow stepped out onto the field. He moved with a calm that did not ask permission, muscles working smoothly beneath a coat restored to health, each stride balanced and sure. The limp was gone, replaced by a measured confidence that did not rush or hesitate. His eyes were different now, no longer scanning for threat, no longer braced for impact. They held a deep, steady clarity, the kind earned through survival rather than instruction. Handlers stood at a distance, their voices low, equipment ready but unused. They did not speak commands. They did not raise hands. This was not a test of obedience. It was a test of truth. Shadow paused at the line, breath steady in the cold air, ears angling forward as he tasted the space ahead. Then the scent reached him. It arrived softly at first, carried on a shift in wind so slight it barely stirred the snow. Familiar, grounded, impossible to mistake. Shadow froze, body locking not in fear but recognition. His head lifted, nostrils flaring, the world narrowing to a single point in the distance where memory sharpened into certainty. He stopped. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then Shadow ran, not at a handler's signal, not at a whistle. Not because training demanded it, he ran because something inside him had already chosen. The snow sprayed beneath his paws as he crossed the field, stride lengthening, breath deepening, the rhythm of motion unlocking something old and unbroken. The distance closed fast, faster than anyone expected, faster than protocol allowed. A murmur rippled through the observers, but no one moved to stop him. Some forces, they understood, were not meant to be corrected. Jonas stood at the far edge of the field, hands buried deep in the pockets of his jacket, shoulders squared against the cold. He'd been invited without explanation, told only to come, to stand where indicated, to wait. Months had settled into his bones since the last time he'd seen Shadow, months of quiet mornings and longer nights, of learning how absence could coexist with peace. He felt it before he saw it. The sound of impact came as a rush of breath and weight, Shadow colliding with him in a blur of motion that stole the ground from beneath his feet. Jonas dropped to one knee, then the other, arms coming up instinctively as the dog pressed into him, full body leaning forward, paws braced, head tucked tight against Jonas's chest. The force was not wild. It was exact, intentional, as if Shadow had been carrying this moment intact the entire time. Jonas wrapped his arms around the dog without thinking. No bark broke the air, no howl followed, only breath, fast and uneven, warming the fabric of Jonas's jacket, grounding him to the moment in a way nothing else could. He closed his eyes, forehead resting against Shadow's head. The world dissolving into sensation, the weight, the heat, the steady thrum of life pressed close. Someone nearby whispered, barely audible, "He remembers." The words drifted through the cold and settled without ceremony. Jonas did not lift his head. He did not answer. He stayed where he was, hands firm against Shadow's shoulders, fingers pressing lightly into fur as if to confirm what he already knew. Memory, he understood now, was not something taught or erased. It was something carried, waiting for the right moment to be allowed home. Shadow pulled back first. He did it gently, stepping away just enough to look at Jonas, eyes bright and steady, tail still, body relaxed. He did not linger. He did not circle back. The connection had been made, sealed without the need for more. Jonas nodded once, a motion so small it could have been missed, and Shadow turned, trotting back toward the line where the handlers waited. The test resumed without comment. Shadow worked the field with focus and grace, movements precise but unforced, responding to terrain and scent with an intelligence that felt less like training and more like purpose. The observers watched quietly, some with arms crossed tight against the cold, others with hands resting loosely at their sides. What they saw was not perfection, it was fit. When the final signal was given, Shadow returned, sitting calmly, posture straight, eyes forward. The decision came without drama, without applause, a nod, a mark on a clipboard, a certification granted not as reward but recognition. Justice, in that moment, did not look like retribution. It looked like placement. Jonas stood apart as the formalities concluded, content to remain unseen. Evelyn found him near the fence, her breath catching when she looked from the field to his face and back again. She did not speak right away. She never did when the truth was still settling. "You see," she said finally, voice low, "how it's supposed to work." Jonas smiled faintly, the expression passing quickly. I do. Shadow was led away then, not struggling, not looking back. He had work to do. Jonas watched until the figures shrank against the white, then turned and walked toward the waiting road, each step steady, unhurried. He did not feel the ache he had expected. Something had been returned, even if it could not be kept. Back at the cabin, the forest greeted him with its familiar quiet. Jonas unlocked the door, stepped inside, and let the stillness wrap around him. He stoked the fire, set the kettle, moved through the space with the ease of habit. The absence was there, yes, but it no longer felt like loss. It felt like space held open. Each morning after that, Jonas opened the cabin door and breathed in whatever the day offered him. Some days it was snow, soft and persistent. Other days it was sun breaking through branches, warming the earth just enough to promise change. He learned the rhythm of it, learned how to listen again, without waiting for something to fill the silence. Somewhere beyond the mountains, Shadow worked. He moved through fields and slopes, through storms that erased landmarks and moments that demanded everything he had. He did not hesitate. He did not look for permission. He did what he had always done best, guided by instinct sharpened through trust. And when the work was done, when the day settled and the handlers packed away their gear, Shadow would pause just for a moment. He would turn his head, not searching, not longing, just orienting himself toward a direction that still mattered. Back in the cabin, Jonas felt it without understanding how. A quiet alignment, a sense that what had been set in motion was still moving, still connected. He poured his coffee, stood at the window, and allowed himself the small, steady comfort of knowing that some bonds did not require proximity to endure. They required only remembrance. When the snow settles and the field grows quiet, what remains is not the sound of boots or engines, but the echo of a choice made without witnesses. A dog who ran not because he was told to. A man who stayed, even when letting go hurt more than holding on. Some bonds are not meant to be kept close, they are meant to be trusted, to be carried forward, quietly, into places where doing the right thing still matters. Loyalty, in its purest form, does not demand reward. Courage does not always raise its voice, and compassion often looks like waiting, or stepping aside, or opening your hands when every instinct tells you to hold tighter. There are men and women in this world who serve without being seen, who protect without applause, who carry the weight so others can walk lighter, and beside them, always, are partners who never ask why, only where. If this story left you with a pause in your chest, let it stay there for a moment. Let it remind you that even in quiet places, hope still moves. Not every hero wears a badge, and not every story makes the headlines. Here at Shadow K9 Unit, we keep their courage alive. Subscribe today so you'll never miss the next untold story of officers and their K9 partners.